If you haven't heard about Anchor, it is the easiest way to make a podcast. Please, let me explain. 1, it is free. 2, there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from the phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many, many others. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It is everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So please, download the free Anchor app and go to anchor.fm and get started today.
The Ear, Evangelical and Reformed Christian Podcast. Welcome to The Ear, the Evangelical and Reformed, a Christian podcast that urges you to think deeper and draws you closer to God through faith. Through powerful sermons, teaching segments, and discussions, The Ear hopes to give you a different perspective on secular topics from a Christian worldview. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Please welcome your host, Brandon Queen.
Good morning, podcast world, and welcome back to another episode of The Ear. This is your boy, Brandon Queen, the podcast king. And we have a very special guest today, and this is a standalone episode. And I have present with me Miss Kai Pineda. She is a pastor. Her and her husband planted a couple churches, and I am going to give the mic to her to let her explain who she is and what she does. Miss Kai, how are you?
I'm great, Brandon. How are you?
I am fantastic. Just trying to get over this cold and get my voice back.
Me too. Yes. Well, I am Kai Pineda. I am, as you've already stated, I pastor with my husband. We plant home fellowships within the U.S. and abroad. And so basically, we pattern ourselves after the Acts Church, which in Acts chapter 2, after the day of Pentecost, it says that they met in homes. And they centered it around study of the word, fellowship, and prayer. And so that's what we do. We go into communities, and like right now I'm in St. Louis. This is one of our newest plants. We came into the community, renovated a 4-duplex into one home, and we hold our fellowship. We hold our fellowships here. And so we get involved in the community itself, in what's happening in the neighborhoods, and we gather for Bible studies and fellowships during the week. And we do this also in Los Angeles, Indiana, the country of belief, and we'll be planting in Dallas and Tennessee this year.
Awesome. Where at in Tennessee?
Yeah. We will be outside of Nashville in a city called Lynchburg, Tennessee. Okay. Which, if anyone knows Lynchburg, it is the home to Jack Daniels. So that's what that's kind of what they're known for. But my husband also does interior design and home improvement renovation. And so my god sister and god brother co-founded a whiskey by the name of Uncle Nearest, which is a fascinating story. He was a free slave that actually taught Jack Daniels how to make whiskey. And so they researched, found his descendants, asked them what they would want. And they said they would want the world to know his name. And 2 years ago founded Uncle Nearest Whiskey, which is now the fastest growing whiskey company in the world, Black owned, female Black owner.
Awesome. That is amazing.
Yeah.
With it being coming toward the end of Black History Month, that's a good piece of information to hear.
Absolutely.
Now, you picked an interesting topic to talk about, and I have kind of talked about this topic during episode 2 of my podcast, Through the Beauty of the Local Church. And today's topic is entitled Racial Divide Within the Church Globally. And the funny thing is, I was on a mission this year. It didn't happen, but I'm going to try it again for next year. I was going to do a season for the entire month of February, and I was going to call that season A History That Divided. And it was obviously going to be Christian-based. I was seeking to interview a bunch of folks that lived during the segregation and civil rights times, just to get, their opinion on how they managed and how they kept their faith in such a horrific time.
Right.
And in my honest opinion, racial divide within the church generally is a topic that I am currently talking about a lot. I'm
Yeah.
Presbyterian, and through my denomination, I'm on a team called the Revelation 7-9 Task Force. And that task
Mm.
force is, if you know the verse,
Yeah.
and I'll read it later for the audience, but that verse is the vision of how the church in general should look. When it comes to
Hmm.
like racism, division, and stuff like that, we're supposed to be one. So I am excited to actually
Absolutely.
dive into this particular conversation on racial divide within the church globally. How is,
Right.
and my first question for you, Miss Kai, is how is
Hmm.
racism shown or displayed in the church globally? Or I'm going to change the word and say how is racism shown in the global church?
Well, I'm excited to join you in this conversation. This is something that has been pressed upon my heart and in my spirit a little bit before 2015. And so I released my first book. It's 3 volumes called Dear Church. And the first one is Dear Church. The title is The Beauty of the Body. So I love that you talked about the beauty of the body, settling in on Corinthians chapter 12, which says that we are many parts, right? But we're one body. And so the second volume, which will be coming out in April, talks about unity. But to answer your question, one thing that I think that we cannot do is ignore that there is a racial divide. I think often globally, we have almost, how do I say it? Let me say it like this. We have put where we live and decided that because maybe where I live isn't segregated, that globally we're not. And that's not true.
Right.
So some of us are in a bubble mentality. That's what I want to say. But globally, we can see it if we just look at this space, okay? We all know and when I say people of color, I am not only speaking of African Americans because I am married to a Latina man. So there are Latina, Asian, just people of color, period. So if we're looking at the divide on a global scale, we know that if we were to look at what we would call the top of Christendom, right? The people who are on the conference circuit, we as people of color know that there are maybe 1 to 2 out of our whole sect of people that get to these conferences, right? We can name them. Even if we are not maybe denominationally affiliated with them, we know their faces. Because when we look at the biggest global conferences, most of those are not run by people of color.
Okay. All right.
When we're talking about, on a global Christian scale, right? They're not usually run by people of color.
Why do you
but
think
what
that
we
is?
would, that's one of the things that I'm looking at, not just in Christendom, but globally in the marketplace. It is still, and I'm going to say it like this, it is still a white man's world.
Okay.
If we look at, just the different markets, I think that the things that unfortunately that we dominate in to a degree is still sports and entertainment, right? I think we are starting to be more recognized in the areas of technology, in different marketplaces, finances, in the pharmaceutical industry, slowly but surely, but still, when it comes to this, our global, if we look at things globally, when we look at the tops of Forbes lists, if we look at the tops of, just every list of every sect, we are still seeing names that are not attached to a person of color. If we look at the political race that we have going right now in the Democratic Party, most of the people of color are already out.
Yeah.
And I'm not, you know what I mean? And I'm not even talking about their politics. We still lean into our preferences, and those are the things that guide us. So even when it comes to Christianity globally, one of the things that I talk about is most of us are leaning into our preferences more than we lead into a biblical standard. So if the Bible says in Revelation we are to be one, if Corinthians 12 says that we are many, but we are to be one, and there are so many other scriptures you and I could quote about unity and oneness in the body. If we serve a God that is a God of reconciliation, right, then what are we not leaning into biblically? What we're doing is, based on my preference, what I like, what I dislike, what I want, what I don't want, I lean into that more than I lean into the word. And so because I lean into that, the way that my preference play out is in my leadership. My preferences then play out into my congregation. And then my preferences play out even into the way I teach.
Okay.
Or interpret the word.
Now, I want to touch up on what you said about the top of Christendom being a white man's territory, if you will. Mm-hmm. Now, I have been, I'm Presbyterian, which is a predominantly white denomination, if you will.
Right.
Right. And I'm a black guy, so we'll get that out there. But I've been looking, I've been looking at some stuff, and this particular ministry I follow closely. It's called Ligonier Ministry. And they do a fine job at pulling out quality no matter who it is. And recently they released this Baptist preacher, this Reformed Baptist preacher. I'm going to mess up his name. I think it's H.B. Charles Jr. Okay. And when I listen to this African-American display the gospel, it's the same way that I've been taught the gospel. I hear the gospel and I interpret the gospel. And he is this single black guy that, in my personal opinion, is at the top of Christendom because that ministry is also at the top of Christendom. I don't know if you ever heard of Vodi Bakum.
I have.
Yeah, he is a Reformed preacher, Baptist preacher as well.
Yep.
He's up there. He's one that I listen to a lot. And there's a few others. But I just did an episode not too long ago on the delights of Christian fame and the dangers of Christian fame. And I will say, let's be honest. Black people sometimes say they want to be at the top or they want more, but they don't. Either they don't push for it, they don't know how to push for it, they don't know how to go and get it. Now, you'll have somebody like you or myself that come along and say, hey, here's your vision. Let's work toward it. And they don't want to work toward it. They just say they want, but they don't want to actually put the work in to do it. And if you think about Christianity, it's the same concept. Okay?
Yes.
We're talking about the beauty of the local church, and everybody wants to be inclusive, but nobody wants to work toward it. Now we're talking about racial divide within the church globally. And how can we work toward fixing it or biblically addressing it, but nobody wants to work toward it because they don't know how to deal with it?
Because people don't want to have the conversation, right?
Exactly.
I think like you're saying, we and I, like you, I look at this from two lenses, right? I can say the exact same thing when it comes to predominantly African-American ministries. I can say, I also know the Caucasian ministers you're going to allow in. Right?
Right.
Because you know what I'm saying? So this is, when I talk about this, I think you and I probably share the same heart. For me, this is bigger than a black and white issue.
Exactly.
Right? This is us. I think the problem is that so many of us are trying to get seats at a table that doesn't work.
Right.
And for me, it's time to create a brand new table. And at this table, we need representatives from every place, not just people who have decided they represent us that we have not chosen to represent us.
Right. Now,
and I think that's, where we've got to work to, is being comfortable enough to have those hard conversations. We have to, as Black people, be ready to hear some things we don't want to hear. We have to stop always pointing the finger.
Right.
Our Caucasian counterparts have to also take responsibility and say, you know what, there have been some things that maybe we did to, appease versus being intentional.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Now, I'll say this too. you got some African American pastors that are